action. So Tim Pool isn't a very wise man. Now, before you just come at me saying I'm just some sort of blind hater, I'll have you notice this hat that I'm wearing in solidarity or respect or something for old Timothy, who is bald and very insecure about it. I thought it would be very unfair if I did this whole video showing how much hair I have, whereas Timothy does not. So people like Tim Pool, Ben Shapiro, Hassan, Vosh, all of them are not people I spend my time, waste my time indulging in. But every now and then I'll get videos of theirs sent my way, which I usually ignore. But recently I was sent a video with a title that piqued my interest from Mr. Timothy. Something along the lines of NPCs are real because science proved it and we call them Democrats. Something very Rush Limbaugh like that. But what caught my attention was the word NPC, I guess the acronym NPC I should say, because I thought maybe Tim has just discovered NPC streamers. And one thing that I'll give a lot of these conservative pundits or chill people, these dudes on the internet, is that sometimes their roast sessions are fun. I could go for a good roast session of NPC streamers, why not? Against my better judgment, this link that was texted to me, I decided I'll click. And boy, oh boy, I was met with 29 minutes of unadulterated, unrestrained humor. But dear viewer, it was not humor in the sense of being amused by some rips at NPC streamers, because it had nothing to do with NPC streaming at all. No, instead it was the rants of a delusional narcissist trying to understand information as he was learning it. Now, the word narcissist gets thrown out a lot, but there are cases where it applies, and this would be one of them. You see, one of the defining characteristics of a narcissist is to act as if they know things that they are just learning about. You give them new information, and the first thing they do is act like they're an expert in that field because they're so overly confident in their intellectual capacity that of course they're an expert in the thing they're just learning about. Now, one of the main reasons I never got into Tim Pool is because the first few times I was exposed to videos of him, what I saw was a dude just talking a bunch of bullshit out of his ass. Now, the topics he was talking about, I was not well versed on, so I couldn't really easily disprove what he was saying, but I know bullshit when I see it. And I could tell this was a dude talking way out of his element. And I just don't want to get information from someone who I could tell has no idea what they're talking about, but just likes to talk. Ben Shapiro suffers from this as well. When Ben Shapiro talks about stuff he knows, he's actually very intelligent and articulate, but most of the time he talks about stuff that he doesn't know. The problem with being narcissistic is you lose the difference between intelligence and knowledge. So what did Tim do that was so dumb in this video? Well, in this video, Tim learns that some people have internal monologues and some people don't. My background's in psychology. This is something I'm actually well versed on. So this is the first time I got to see Tim talk about things that I actually know about. So instead of just inferring that he was speaking bullshit, I got to see it firsthand, and it was pretty funny. And don't worry, I'm going to give you some concrete examples of when Tim was just flat out very embarrassingly and ironically wrong. Stay tuned. This microphone's shaking. Anyway, so Tim has just learned that about half of the population, depending on who you ask, do not have an internal monologue.
Did you know that a study was done that found that only around 26% of people have what's described as an inner monologue?
Now, he's careful to state that this wouldn't mean that you're an NPC, a non-playable character by default, as he realizes that people can have thoughts without using language.
To understand why things are the way they are and why life is so terribly frustrating, remember that 50% of the population don't even have an inner monologue, and they get to vote too. You see, the people who think to themselves with their inner monologue, which is probably many of you, including myself, tend to view themselves as superior. Why, anyone who does not is an NPC. Yeah, I don't buy that. There are varying degrees of cognitive function. Some people think in amorphous, abstract ways that don't require words.
Good job, Tim. But he doesn't seem very convinced by this notion either. He's almost saying that as an aside to be like, I guess you're not automatically dumb if you don't have an internal monologue, just in case some of his viewers don't, I think is what he was trying to do there. But he goes on some self-promoting tirades about how fast his internal monologue is. Yes, no one thinks faster words than he thinks.
And if you're wondering why it is that I talk so fast, it's because the narration in my mind is probably at 5 to 10 times verbal communication speed. If you've ever heard me do that rapid fire pitch at the end of Timcast IRL, and I say, become a member at timcast.com, sign up, join our, blah, 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 you get the point. That is slower then I think things.
He says, I talk really fast, so you know that I'm already thinking this fast, but what you don't know is that in my brain, it's going even faster. Congratulations, Tim. What am I supposed to do with that information? You know, sometimes instead of thinking quickly, it's better to, you know, think. Might want to try it. In any case, up to this point, Tim has just clearly demonstrated that he doesn't understand the significance of having or not having an internal monologue. And the significance of that is generally down to personality traits or certain physical disabilities, in that, like, deaf people typically don't have an internal monologue because they don't have the same structured language if they've been deaf from birth. Doesn't mean that they're any less capable of thought or intellect, just means that the way they think is naturally different. But while Tim is trying to wrestle with this insane concept that other people don't think the same way that he thinks, he finds himself watching a TikTok video wherein a young woman describes her experience with not having an internal monologue, but also having aphantasia.
If you told me to think of an apple right now and I closed my eyes, I would quite literally see blackness.
Now, aphantasia is when you cannot visualize things in your mind. Tim is clearly not aware of what aphantasia is or that it's a thing because he immediately directly relates it to the lack of an internal monologue, whereas aphantasia is not related. You can have an internal monologue and aphantasia, or you cannot have an internal monologue and aphantasia. They're not related. And aphantasia only affects about 1 to 3% of the population, whereas internal monologue is very hard to determine how many people have it or don't because it's more of, again, a personality thing, not a neurological thing, whereas aphantasia is very much a neurological thing. So based on a lady on TikTok talking about her personal experience, he has now incorrectly associated aphantasia with internal monologue, and has also deduced that if you both have aphantasia and no internal monologue, then you are not capable of thought. And he justifies this by saying, I think, therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And it's like there's a word for it. Visualize. It means think of it in your mind. You can see it in your brain. I have to just say this, with all due respect to that woman. She is an NPC.
He goes on a goofy tirade where he tries to look up the definition of sentience to say that these people wouldn't be sentient, only to realize that he has a misunderstanding of what the definition of sentience is.
Now, non-player character is probably not the right way to phrase it, but this is a non-sentient being. I mean, let me do this. Capable of sensing or feeling, conscious of or responsive to the sensations of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. Okay, perhaps I'm being a little bit too harsh.
It's a wild ride, I'm telling you. But the pinnacle, the epitome, I think is a word he uses in this, of irony of this video is when Tim talks about when he took IQ tests growing up and what role visualization played. I
remember when I was younger and we had these IQ tests, and I've taken them formally or whatever. Wow. They'll give you a picture of an object and ask you to rotate it in your mind, or to take a cube and unfold the cube and all of its sides and then place them on it. This is testing your spatial awareness and your ability to visualize. If that's one, I'm well beyond that. Not only can I imagine an apple, okay, RoboCop is juggling a bunch of apples while Oliver Anthony's
The reason this made me laugh quite a bit and is delightfully ironic is because people with aphantasia specifically score between 7 and 15% higher on IQ tests on average. Let me run that back again. Tim, who has no idea what aphantasia is using a video of a girl on TikTok describing having aphantasia, relating it to something completely not related to aphantasia, which is the existence or lack thereof of an internal monologue, and then further stating that aphantasia would clearly be a disadvantage on things like an IQ test, therefore justifying his belief that people with this aren't actually thinking, despite the truth that people with aphantasia score higher on IQ tests on average than people without it. You see, when people just talk completely out of their ass like this, like Tim Pool does habitually, it's real funny to watch. An aside, if you watch people like Tim Pool, please stop. Unless you just don't respect yourself intellectually. Nobody knows stuff about everything. Anyone who talks about everything like they're an expert, they know nothing. They might be smart, but that doesn't mean they know anything. There's a difference. You should really stick to people that tell you what their expertise is, and anywhere that is not in their realm of knowledge, they'll just say, I don't really know that area, but this is my opinion on it. Food for thought. One last thing I want to bring up in this insanity of a video. Tim at one point talks about what future consciousness for for humanity might look like.
It makes me fascinated by what would be beyond human. We view ourselves as the epitome, the apex of conscious thought. We are reasoning beings. We can build and control and manipulate our environments. What's next?
And he has no idea. He's like, I can't even fathom it. Added irony here is a lot of people have laid out what the next step of consciousness for humans would look like. Psychologists, notable mathematicians, and so forth have laid out the framework for what makes sense next logical step. So not only could Tim utilize those resources to help him imagine, he also lacks that imaginative skill, which is all part of what he's criticizing throughout the video, that people can't formulate their own thoughts. Formulating your own thought includes imaginative and hypothetical thought that he clearly struggles with.
I don't know how to, I have no other understanding of, it's unfathomable to me.
He needs pragmatic things to attach to, which is a lack of individual thought. Now, if you're curious, the next level of human evolution consciousness, as hypothesized by philosophers, people like Einstein and so forth, is, once again, ironically for Tim, a step away from language. I say ironically because Tim seems very, very attached to language as a strength of intelligence and how fast he can interact with language being so important.
As I'm reading this, it's quite literally the easiest thing for me to do. I'm reading words and I can say them quickly. I'm also preparing what's going to be said after the paragraph is done being read. So while I'm reading, I am actually writing the script, essentially, for what is to be said next.
But most people agree that if humans are to evolve to a next step of consciousness, language will have to fundamentally change, because language for hyper-intelligent people is a limiter, not an enhancer. This is a misconception of people who are above average intelligence, but not like hyper-intelligent. This is where you get people who learn big words to sound smart. Language is just a way to express ideas and concepts, but it gets in the way because a lot of times people will have an idea or concept that doesn't have words that describe it, or it's just hard to articulate. And so you have to use the limited word pool or make up new words and help people understand what the words mean in order to get higher and more complex thoughts out. Language, as much as it's an advantage, is also an inhibitor, and the next level of human conscious would be a way for us to communicate that isn't limited by preset confines of language, whether that be through a more direct neurological communication due to an evolutionary advancement in how our neurons can talk to other people's neurons, or just some more advanced fluid form of language that doesn't have to follow a set of rules and arbitrary standards. And so it's just funny that someone who's so obsessed with language being what makes them intelligent doesn't realize that most people who are actually hyper intelligent realize that language is actually a barrier in intelligence getting to a higher level.
The first step towards language was to link acoustically or otherwise commutable signs to sense impressions. Most likely, all sociable animals have arrived at this primitive kind of communication. Only at this further development, where frequent use is made of so-called abstract concepts, language becomes an instrument of reasoning in the true sense of the word. But it is also this development which turns language into a dangerous source of error and deception. Everything depends on the degree to which words and word combinations correspond to the world of impression. Is there no thinking without the use of language? Has not every one of us struggled for words, although the connection between things was already clear?
You see, intelligent people have large vernaculars not because they go out and find big words to make themselves feel smart, like people like Tim probably do, but it's because they have ideas and concepts that they find are difficult to express with the common words that they hear all the time. So they want to have more words to be able to more specifically explain exactly what they're thinking or trying to express, rather than using broader, more basic terms. So when people who are highly intelligent have large vocabularies, it's not a result of they went to the dictionary and started learning words. It's because they sought out words to help explain things quicker. But a lot of people who are pseudo-intelligent, Reddit IQ 300 intelligent, will literally spend time either reading books with these big words that they'll look up and find the meanings of, or literally in the dictionary looking up words because they want to have other big words that they could say, because they think that's what intelligence is, but they don't realize that people who use intelligent words, who are actually intelligent, didn't do that with the same intentionality. They learned those words as a means to help express terms and concepts that they were having a difficulty expressing with the words that they were commonly hearing in everyday conversation. In any case, this entire video is hilariously painful to watch if you know anything about human psychology, how thought works, or any of that. It was a delightful 29 minutes. I highly recommend it if you are watching for satirical purposes. If you want to watch a man who knows literally nothing of what he's talking about speak about it very confidently in an embarrassing way, I recommend. Tim Pool, you're real fucking dumb.